Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. And we wanted to talk today about Scott Hall, who passed away the other day after a blood clot happened during a routine hip surgery. And he had three heart attacks, was put on life support, and his family made the decision to take him off life support. And eventually he did pass away yesterday. So I did want to talk about it a little bit. Obviously, Scott Hall was one of the biggest and most influential wrestlers in the history of pro wrestling and sports entertainment. So I did want to say a few things about that and kind of talk about his career and give my thoughts on it because Scott Hall definitely was one of the most influential people in my entire wrestling fandom, which has gone on some 30 plus years. Um, I guess the funny thing for me is like I'm about a generation older than a wrestling generation, which is about 6 to 8 years. I'm about a generation older than a lot of the other YouTubers or podcasters out there right now. So my memories are a little bit different from some of the tributes and stuff that I've seen from a lot of people. But I first saw Scott Hall in a Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine back in the 80s as a little kid. And back then in the 80s, Tom Selleck was a major star, a major TV star, and a lot of guys had that look. The handlebar mustache and the hairy chest and the curly long hair and the outrageous shirts and all of that stuff. Very Magnum PI. Magnum TA had that look as well to some extent. So anybody with that look stuck out. And when you would go flip through the old Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the Wrestler magazines, they would cover every territory as was cool back in the day, and then you got to learn about different wrestlers that you may not be able to see in your area on TV. So that was the first time I had seen him, and there were a couple AWA shows. I remember him teaming up with Curt Hennig way before Mr. Perfect was Mr. Perfect, and WWF actually did reference that when Scott Hall came in as Razor Ramon to the WWF later on. I then remember him as the Diamond Stud in WCW. Scott Hall actually did perform as Scott Hall, I think, at the Great American Bash '89. I remember him. Maybe he was in the Battle Royal or he was around as himself before that, but he came back later. Became the Diamond Stud under Diamond Dallas Page as kind of Diamond. It's kind of to be said. The Diamond Stud was a prototype, I always thought, of what Razor Ramon would be. Because if you go back and look at the Diamond Stud, you can see a lot of little early Razor Ramon mannerisms, and even the look is similar. The slick back black hair, the sunglasses, toothpicks, and all that stuff. He had this thing about ripping off his pants, which is Tai Chi in New Japan is known for that now, but that's what the Diamond Stud did. And I remember, I think one of the last pay-per-views that Scott Hall did as the Diamond Stud in WCW, Halloween Havoc '91. I think on his entrance, people were finally starting to pop for his entrance. And I remember at the time as a kid going, "Oh wow, he's becoming popular," or as we say now, getting over. We didn't talk like that back then. But the fans were reacting to his stuff. But soon after that, of course, he made the transition over to the WWF. And Vince did as Vince tended to do back in those days, is take an idea, because WCW had ideas, and a lot of times WCW just was not very good at marketing. This will come into play later on too. But it looked like Vince and Scott Hall took elements of the Diamond Stud and made this new character, Razor Ramon, who was entirely based off of Tony Montana, Al Pacino's character, of course, from Scarface. I am kind of surprised to see that there are a lot of people who did not know that they didn't draw the correlation. I guess it's a generational thing that Razor Ramon was based off of Tony Montana from Scarface. Even some of his lines, like "I want the world and everything in it," and Chico and the bad guy, which was Tony Montana's famous speech in Scarface in the restaurant where he's like, point your finger at the bad guy. You're never going to see a bad guy like this again. And let me tell you, I can't do it I can't do it as good as they do it. But
so say good night to the bad guy. The last time you're going to see a bad guy like this again, let me tell you.
Scott Hall did adopt a lot of that. He's from Miami and Cuban and all that stuff. So there was, it was kind of like him and Manny, the character were kind of merged. It was like Tony and Manny's character were kind of merged, and then came Razor Ramon, essentially. So there was a lot of promos back when WWE used to do those. Introducing you to a character, and a lot of setup shots before the character debuted on TV. I always loved those. I wish they'd do more of them. You got to see this character come to life, but very quickly it became his own character. Razor Ramon was less of a Tony Montana clone over time, and just became Razor Ramon. And obviously a lot of matches. He was synonymous with the Intercontinental Championship, much the same way as late 80s, early 90s, Lex Luger was synonymous with the U.S. Championship, and it looked like it was made for him. Shinsuke Nakamura, you could say that. In New Japan, the IWGP Intercontinental Championship in the 2010s was synonymous for Shinsuke Nakamura. It was his belt, and the U.S. title was Luger's belt. Well, in the New Generation era, the Intercontinental Championship was Razor Ramon's belt. In fact, when he won his first belt, in that or championship, sorry, in the finals of that tournament against Rick Martel. I remember him putting on the belt and Gorilla Monsoon saying, it looks good on him. And I remember as a kid I was probably early teenagers then. I remember looking at it and go, yeah, it looks like the belt looks like it's made for him. And he is one of the greatest Intercontinental champions of all time. 4 reigns as the IC champion. Well, interesting thing though, he wasn't in WWF very, very long. He was in there from 92 to 96. And then he came back a little bit for a cup of coffee in 2002, I think, 2002, 2003, around then, with the whole NWO invading the WWF angle, but didn't last very long. But most of his career was spent in other places, including WCW, which of course we all know in 96, he moved over to World Championship Wrestling. And this is where Scott Hall, I think this is where him as a performer and as a person and as one of the boys, as they say, really made his mark in the wrestling world. At that time, and I was in my late teens at that time. At that time, you still got a lot of information from the wrestling magazines, but they were like a month behind on the news. But AOL was a thing, and the internet was a thing, becoming a thing. And I remember checking AOL and looking at the wrestling news boards, and there was, I think it was like February of 96. There was this big news. I remember it was just in big bold letters, and that was no pizzazz, no flash with it. It was just text on the screen. And I remember seeing Scott Hall, a.k.a. Razor Ramon, and Kevin Nash, a.k.a. Diesel, will be leaving the WWF and heading to WCW. And back in those days, when you saw something like that, it pretty much was truth. It wasn't rumors. It was something that somebody had leaked out. And I remember me and my wrestling friends at the time, and a lot of other fans who were online in the early days of the wrestling internet, we all knew what was coming. But it would be 3 months before Scott would go to WCW, and we knew Diesel was leaving too. So like it's weird to, and I remember going back and looking at 1996 and the early days of WWF in 96, and I remember trying to see, what they were going to do, because at that point I had been a wrestling fan for a while, and I kind of understood what happened when somebody was coming into a company, when somebody was leaving a company. His last match was some weird diaper match with the 1-2-3 kid at the In Your House. He wasn't at WrestleMania that year. That was his last show, was at the Full House show, the 1-2-3 kid, and I remember knowing that was his last show. Kevin Nash, of course, would stay on through WrestleMania and through the In Your House after that. And I remember clocking, I was like, we all knew they were leaving. We all thought they were going to leave at WrestleMania, but Scott left before, Kevin left afterwards. And then it was just, I distinctly remember, it was a waiting period. We were waiting, okay, they're going to WCW. And me and my friends would joke about this because, again, back to WCW not being very good at branding, they had gotten a Big Boss Man and called him the Boss. And they had gotten Earthquake and called him Shark. And we were speculating about what lame name WCW were going to give him. Like, are they going to call Razor Ramon now Chico? Is Diesel now going to be Big D? It's like, what lame name is WCW going to give him? Because that was a problem with WCW. Vince was far better of marketing than the WCW people were, which ultimately was part of the reason why WCW didn't win the war. But then, as we all know, that famous day when Scott Hall comes out on Monday Nitro, right in the middle, right through the crowd, right in the middle of a match, completely done as if it was not planned and not scripted, and cut that promo, and then that began the road to the NWO and the WCW and the Monday Night Wars and an Attitude Era came. All of that spun out of that. Because here's the thing, why that was so significant, what Scott Hall did, for two reasons. Number one, before Scott Hall left, there were definite lines in the sand of the WCW, WWF Monday Night War in the early days. It was like, okay, WWF has its stars. It was Undertaker, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Diesel. And the WCW has its main event guys, the Giant, Sting, Hogan, Flair, and Savage. A couple other guys here. You could throw Yokozuna. You could throw, Lex Luger into some of those as well. But those were the established big names on both shows. And both of those, and at that time, both shows were 1 hour long. So you tuned in really to see, those five guys in each of those shows. And at that time, it's not like it is now where you have like ardent AEW fans who hate WWE and WWE fans who hate AEW. There were WWF only fans and WCW only fans, but the majority of the wrestling people I talked to, because we would have one or both companies would come in with house shows in Baltimore almost monthly. So you see the same people at all the shows. So a lot of us watched both companies. And a lot of my friends watched both companies, but they would have their favorites. I was more of a WWF guy back in 1996. And because I just hated Eric Bischoff because he was so obnoxious. And that's why I was more of a WWF guy at the time. It was weird to see that, oh my, when I saw that notice that they were leaving, well, that's a big thing. Because in those days, people watched the wrestling shows for the stars. That's how come WCW got the popularity they did, because they had the big name stars. And now, where it was kind of even with the guys I mentioned before, now WWF was losing two of those guys, and Hall and Nash were going over to WCW. So WWF was left with, it was just going to be Bret and Undertaker and Shawn. And even weirder than that, not too long after that, Shawn would be injured, Bret would leave. I guess it's probably, side note, probably why Vince is so high on The Undertaker and respects him so much, because if Undertaker had left in 96, we might not be talking about WWE today. So, because again, at that time, it was your star power, not the brand name. But when they went over there, one thing that they did that was quite significant outside of just changing the landscape of the wrestling world for us as fans and the perception of WCW and the Monday Night War and all that stuff, but for the boys and the girls who were wrestlers, there were very few guaranteed contracts back at that time. Before that time, I think Lex Luger is touted as being one of the first wrestlers to get a big guarantee contract in Jim Crockett Promotions and WCW back in the day, but it wasn't as common as it is now. Vince did not like giving guaranteed contracts. In fact, you'll see several interviews of a lot of wrestlers talking about that time period and how Vince didn't believe in contracts. He believed in giving opportunities, as he said. And points on your merchandise. So that's how Vince always sold it. Vince didn't want to do guaranteed contracts. But as WCW started offering all these big money guaranteed contracts to a lot of wrestlers, it got a lot of wrestlers a lot more money. But after that, Vince went on to guarantee contracts for almost every single wrestler he had that would appear on WWF television to kind of protect his intellectual property. Or somebody, these guys going over to WCW and immediately taking it. So that's why we have today the 90-day no-compete clause and all of that stuff. So, but overall, what Scott did, and it was Scott, because he did ask Kevin to come along with him. What Scott Hall did changed the pay scale for every wrestler from then up until today. So every wrestler today who's got a big money contract, no matter where it is, no matter if you're in New Japan or AEW or MLW or Impact or WWE or NXT, if you've got a decent contract with a lot of money with, at least 6 digits in it, 6 figures, Scott Hall's the guy to probably thank for that. And that's why so many wrestlers respect him. He did really change it for the boys and the girls to actually get paid more of what they deserve. I still think they're kind of underpaid, some of them, but he definitely made it a lot better and a lot more of the money getting to the wrestlers. So Scott Hall will always be remembered from that, from apparently a lot of people in the industry. And of course, he had his runs in TNA, and later on in life, he's been an ambassador, and he's been, WWE Hall of Fame twice, and he's showed up and liked AEW stuff and NXT stuff. So, his son is a wrestler. So there's a lot going on there and a lot of legacy. The whole DDP yoga thing that he did to get his life back together. And it is unfortunate that the hip injury and hip surgery led to an accidental death here. That guy lived through so much stuff, and for it to be a blood clot during surgery, a routine surgery, it's a tragedy. Then on the other side, Scott Hall lived a very colorful life. That man lived a very full. I don't think anybody can say that Scott Hall did not live a full life in his 62, 63 years on the planet. And, at the end of the day, I think all of us as fans just appreciate and should say a big thank you to Scott Hall. And that a lot of what we enjoy about wrestling now wouldn't be if it wasn't for Scott Hall taking that big leap, having left WCW where they didn't do much with him, going to the WWF for 4 years, becoming a big star there, and then taking the risk of going back to WCW, but for more money, but ultimately it being the best thing for the pro wrestling industry and the pro wrestling fans and the wrestlers themselves. And of course, above and beyond all this, though, his role as a friend, his role as a father, his role as a coworker, and because the wrestling fraternity, those guys and girls are a family, and they're hurting too. So my condolences to all of those people, and let's just celebrate it. Watch a lot of old school Scott Hall stuff, Razor Ramon stuff. I'd even go back and watch some of his old AWA stuff. Before 1992, Scott Hall's career didn't start in 1992. There's a lot of stuff before that was pretty good too, especially him and Curt Hennig teaming up together. That was pretty cool. But that's just what I wanted to talk about today. Those are my thoughts on the passing of Scott Hall, aka Razor Ramon, one of the most important and influential people in the modern wrestling history, maybe in the entirety of wrestling history. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you later when we have some probably happier things to talk about here on the Rant and Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.